Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants. Welcome to this attached technical meeting on climate resilient and environmentally sustainable health supply chains. This is a meeting, that we're holding jointly with ATACH and the Secretariat of Global Framework of Chemicals. This brings together, the two communities together and on the momentum that we've had earlier meetings. So this is, a continuing momentum that is going on since the October consultation that we had, that a couple of you were present, and then the February consultation with the Global Framework of Chemicals. So before we start the meeting, I would just let you know that we have the interpretations in Spanish and French. You can see on the slide here how to reach to the interpretation channels. You can reach through the menu bars or the bottom icons that you look into your screen. Also in this meeting, we are going to have some poll questions. So the Zoom poll questions, you can again see how to reach. It can be reached through the more icon that's there. And to just start, before I start and hand it over to Elena to welcome you all, I would just launch a question on the poll, which is, are you affiliated with ATACH or the Global Framework of Chemicals? Just to see if everybody can access the poll. And while you are all answering the poll questions, I see already colleagues joining in the poll. Up here, you see the meeting agenda. You'll see the meeting is the welcome remarks, and the opening is done by WHO colleagues. Then we hand it over to Leslie for report back from the consultation. And then we have a section where we have some very interesting presentations from our colleagues from NHS, Unitaid, Global Self-Care Federation, and Healthcare Without Harm. So without further ado, maybe I should just hand it over to Elena, who is from the ATACH Secretariat and the lead for the country support and capacity work in climate change and health unit at WHO. So Elena, that's over to you.
Thank you very much, Mega. I will be using some slides, so I don't know if we can already share the slides. My intention is not to take much of your time because I think the most interesting part is going to come from the presentations from the technical partners later. I think that from the ATACH side and as the Secretariat lead here in WHO, the most important thing is to make sure that all this effort that was made to pull together this technical meeting under the ATACH last year, thanks to the effort and collaboration between Unitaid and our colleague Mega and Leslie here in WHO, basically is reported back. They have been launching a report that you will be hearing later more also. And basically, I think from the ATACH, basically we just want to ensure that the lead that has been sustained since COP26 from the UK as presidents of COP26, then Egypt with the launch of the action on climate and nutrition, then also with COP28, the first health day, the declaration that has been signed by over 150 countries, of course the new WHO resolution on climate change and health, and more recently the efforts by Azerbaijan at COP29 launching the Climate and Health Continuity Coalition. Basically, all these efforts have come together and they've been supporting the ATACH until now. So all these priorities that in relation to climate change and health that were coming out of the different COPs and also from the WHO resolution are now being taken by all of the ATACH partners, and we will aim for those to be implemented. This is relevant because, of course, supply chain is one of the priority areas for the ATACH, both in terms of climate resilience, but also in terms of low carbon sustainability, decreasing the emissions, reducing the environmental impact, and that's why it's also important the connection with plastic. Next slide, please. I will not go into enter into all these details, but basically, you know that the different delivery mechanisms for the ATACH now are represented in the task teams and technical meetings. The task teams is basically partners coming together to produce one set of guidance, for example, that countries have requested, or tools or something that they need to basically move to implementation at country level on climate change and health. And then the technical meetings is basically priority topics that they want to learn more with the same intention, basically increase their implementation at country level. Next slide. So the most important topic today is supply chain. Again, there is one task team dedicated to supply chain that is led by NHS, but that has different subtasks under that. So today you will have the opportunity to hear from NHS, but also UNDP, the ICANN, and then WHO, sorry, and then well, WHO in the ICANN, to hear about everything that is being proposed and advanced under this important task team on supply chain. Next slide. This is just one slide because the expert meeting that was pulled together by colleagues in Unitaid and WHO was also bringing together the efforts by our colleagues working on chemicals. And basically, we wanted to make sure that there is some information shared on the global framework on chemicals, which was adopted in Bonn in 2023. This framework is the successor agreement to the strategic approach to international chemicals management. Since this is a framework, is not a legally binding instrument, but a framework that aims to put together all of the partners and countries around a concerted approach to chemicals. It is multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder, and as partners, you will have represented WHO, UNEP, ILO, and also FAO. And the framework recognizes the health sector as a critical contributor, and also recognizing its expertise to basically contribute to the sound management of chemicals and waste to the promotion of health and well-being. Something that is different is that it includes targets and indicators. It focuses on implementation, and has an emphasis not only on chemical management, but also on waste. So I think with that, this is it from the ATACH, and just to thank again the partners for coming to this meeting and present.
Thanks, Elena. Thanks for providing the background, of ATACH and the global framework of chemicals. And now I think I'll just hand it over to the Director for Pre-Qualifications, Regulations and Health Product at WHO, Dr. Rogerio Gasper, who will do the opening remarks and provide us with an update on the green pharmaceutical regulatory highways. Over to you, Rogerio.
Thank you so much, Mega, and my apologies for the participants on this work that I will not be able to continue in the meeting because of previous engagements. But if you can have the next slide, please. So together with our colleagues that were dealing already with the climate initiatives and with the strong support from our partners at Unitaid, the Department of Regulation and Pre-Qualification at WHO, which is part of the still existing division on access for medical products, decided last year to engage on a frame that is complementary to the other activities. As we know, access to innovation has a number of barriers, and regulatory systems, when they are not working close with innovation, they might become a barrier for change, since regulatory systems by default have a very strong set of regulations that are established for due reasons to protect public health. But if not linked directly to innovative processes, they become then static barriers in the middle of innovation. So as it was done before in the last 20, 30 years, with different discussions about barriers of innovation, and probably the most dramatic example was the absolutely essential role of regulators during COVID-19, anticipating the need for response with rolling reviews during the clinical development. We decided also to set up a plan that is a plan that has three main components. One is the establishment of new standards and guidelines, regulatory guidelines, that will support innovative approaches in the manufacturing, distribution, and usage of medical products, contributing to reduce the carbon footprint, mitigating impact on the environment, for example, with issues related with waste management. This is a major endeavor in which WHO is part of the process, has certainly a leading role, and that's the position that we decided to assume in December 2024, but needs to bring a coalition of regulatory authorities at the national level, and also intergovernmental bodies and international organizations like the International Conference for Harmonization, or ICH, or the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, ECMRA. Our department representing WHO at both platforms has already engaged with both of them in November in Brasilia during the General Assembly of ICMRA, and more recently in March in Budapest at the Management Committee of ICH, calling for the regulators to join the umbrella coalition of regulators that WHO wants to lead to introduce those changes. We will have next week in Madrid a new management committee, but also the annual General Assembly of ICH, in which I will have the opportunity to represent WHO and bring this topic to the discussion. The second point is the digital transformation of regulatory services. And a lot of things is said about this because a number of people believe that everything is done on this area since the introduction of ECTD. Well, the ECTD as a regulatory format for the submission of marketing authorizations in medicines and vaccines was in fact introduced almost 20 years ago, but it's far from being adopted all over the world. Just to give you two numbers, we have moved about half of the population of the planet since 2016 under functional regulatory systems. But that number is a double caveat because we can't count on that number China and India, in which only the regulatory systems for vaccines work under international standards, and WHO doesn't recognize the regulatory systems for medicines in both settings. But also at the same time, 70% of the member states of WHO still lack functional regulatory systems. So the digitalization of regulatory services, which seems something very close to the heart and very simple to implement when you are in a high-income country, is far from being a reality and needs to contribute to the reduction not only of the carbon footprint, but also to the harmonization of electronic standards, both for clinical research and the registration of medical products. The third component is the adoption of what we call the greener, a regulatory highway for greener pharmaceuticals, because we know from the experience on COVID-19 on the positive side, but we know also from the negative side with experiences led by major regulators in the last 2 decades, that when this is not done in an appropriate format, regulatory systems become part of the problem in this setting. So one of the proposals, and we are setting right now an expert advisory group and preparing a white paper to be discussed at the summit in November this year. We'll be looking at a number of facilitation of regulatory procedures and regulatory pathways that will allow in this area to have something very similar to what was the display during COVID-19 with the rolling reviews. In a word, bringing regulatory systems close to innovation with a specific focus on facilitating greener pharmaceuticals on several components. Components just to exemplify focused on the manufacturing processes and the reduction of carbon footprint or use of organic solvents in the manufacturing of APIs, but also issues related with packaging, not only on medicines and vaccines, but also on medical devices, or the use of reusable components, and in general, looking at new materials and new manufacturing processes that need to be part of the process on the medical products area. So in a nutshell, we are looking at in a coordinated manner to facilitate access to innovation in this area. This is part also of a major endeavor that WHO is now pursuing with a reform of the pre-qualification process to be approved by the Expert Committee on Biological Standards and the Expert Committee on Pharmaceutical Products later this year, but also the alignment procedure of 16 departments from 5 divisions inside WHO, bringing the clinical recommendations on medical products, the pre-qualification and the standards more aligned, the so-called alignment process. So this initiative of a regulatory highway for greener pharmaceuticals is not an initiative in isolation, is part of a coordinated endeavor that is being implemented during the year of 2025 with a number of pilots, and then forthcoming changes also to be introduced in 26 and 27. Mega, for saving time, I will stop here and give you back the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, for providing us the overview and all the work that your department is leading with the other regulatory systems across the world. So as Rogerio said, unfortunately, he has to leave for another meeting. But if you have any questions for Rogerio, I would encourage you to put them in the Q&A so we can share it with him at a later stage and have the answers across. So thank you again, Rogerio, for your ongoing work and your leadership in this area. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and I apologize once more.
Thank you so much. So now I will just hand it over to Leslie, who's sitting right next to me here. She is the unit head for the chemical health and safety at here in WHO, who would present the outcomes from the WHO Unitaid Joint Expert Consultation and the Global Framework of Chemical Implementation Program, where she would highlight the outcomes and the key priority actions and the takeaways from these meetings and the next, action points that we have. So over to you, Leslie.
Thanks very much, Mega, and it's a great pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. So Elena mentioned in her introductory remarks that we held a significant consultation in October 2024 on climate resilient and environmentally sustainable supply chains in the health sector. This was actually a very innovative meeting in a way, in that it was the first time we had both colleagues, stakeholders, and ministries of health and other UN agencies, but both from the climate change and environment area and also the pharmaceuticals, regulatory and supply areas plus others, and together with global financing organizations in the private sector. So it was a very diverse audience, and we had a lot of shared information to get to impart. And so certainly I don't think anyone in the room, any of the 80 participants, could claim that they were fully aware of all of the activities which were going on and all of the opportunities for closer working together. So it was a very much an exploratory expert consultation. We ended up with a much better common shared understanding of the key challenges and opportunities facing the health sector in achieving a low carbon, climate resilient and environmentally sustainable supply chains. We identified a number of strategies, tools and resources which would be important in supporting countries in advancing this agenda, and also joining up with this new framework, the Global Framework on Chemicals. So it really was a meeting where we shared experiences and strengthened collaboration amongst countries and other partners. Next slide, please. As part of this consultation, a key part was hearing about innovative examples of work that was already being underway, and some of these are shared on this slide. So there was a very diverse range of case studies, the decarbonisation of health products presented by Unitaid. There was the decarbonisation of insecticide-treated bed nets and innovation in that area. There was examples of promoting high-quality, low-carbon respiratory care by optimizing the use of inhalers. There was examples of more sustainable procurement on the demand side. and examples from the Global Framework on Chemicals, and also on the sustainable procurement of vaccines. Amongst many, there are probably, I'd say, 15 or 20 case studies presented. And in the report of the meeting, you'll find links to those case studies and you can read more about them. Next slide, please. So following the meeting and building on the enthusiasm that was generated, there was this position paper that was jointly released by Unitaid, ATACH, and the World Health Organization, which tried to summarize some of the key priorities for collective action that we heard about during this meeting. And essentially these priority areas were in 4 different areas: in health, innovation, research and development, in environmental excellence in manufacturing, in procurement, transport and logistics, and in end-of-life and circularity. And in each of those areas, there were certain activities identified which would be needing to build up further evidence, work on norms, standards and regulations, work on the financial mechanisms of market shaping, as well as accountability, transparency and reporting. And all of that supported by a formal framework for user communities and different political will, leadership, and so on. So all of the issues were certainly cross-cutting and interlinked, but the diagram on this slide really does summarize it in a nutshell. There were some key principles which were agreed by the participants to help to shape this agenda further, and they are also shared. A need to very much focus on the risk and hotspots, key priorities, a need to continue to share learnings and take action, share accountability, taking a holistic approach, tailoring strategies to contexts, putting people at the center, and prioritizing equity and health outcomes, as was also mentioned by Rogerio in his presentation. So the publication that you see on the screen, the Key Priorities of Collective Action, is available on the ATACH Community of Practice website. And I would point you to go to that publication for getting a lot more of the detail and for getting those linkages to the case study. Next slide, please. So as the next piece of the jigsaw puzzle that we want to introduce you to, so that there are certainly many opportunities as presented by Elena in the ATACH community for working on these issues, and the expert consultation that we held in October did a fantastic job of putting those into a framework, identifying the priorities. The Global Framework on Chemicals is another framework which provides opportunities for us to collectively pursue some of this agenda. And Elena has already mentioned that this is a successor agreement, but what's new is very much that it focuses on implementation programs. Now, previously, its successor agreement was focusing on the manufacture of chemicals. So it was focusing very much on the production of the chemicals, whereas this new framework takes much more of a life cycle approach and focuses on the use of the chemicals as well. So when we say the framework is gearing up to focus on implementation programs, that includes identifying selective industries, sectors, where there could be some targeted program of work developed. And the healthcare sector is one such industry that's being considered. Other industries being considered are electronics industry, the textiles industry, industries where there are lots of chemicals used. And certainly we recognize that healthcare is one of those, whether the chemicals are used in pharmaceuticals, pharmaceutical manufacturing, whether they're in medical devices, whether we find it in waste, or whether we use it in chemicals used in hospital settings, such as disinfectants and anesthetic gases and so on. So under this framework, which is again a multi-sector, multi-stakeholder framework, currently the work is developing terms of reference for these programs of work. So identifying which of the global framework strategic objectives, targets and indicators could be met by setting up these programs of work, identifying the relevant stakeholders that would be involved. And in discussions in October and since then, we've identified that hospitals themselves are important stakeholders, that the medical device and pharmaceutical sectors themselves are interested and are developing work to do with environmental sustainability and detoxifying the chemicals that they use. The work that we're undertaking to develop terms of reference also involves identifying the types of activities that would be led by different stakeholders, mechanisms to disseminate the products of collaboration, and to identify resources and also consider what resource opportunities there are. And there are new opportunities in terms of trust funds associated with this global framework, but also work going on with investment communities to try to identify and leverage some of the resources that those investment systems have for funding work in this area. Next slide, please. So some of the possible objectives for working in supply chains and chemicals used in the healthcare industry involving chemicals, some of them are quite similar to the ones which came out of the October consultation and are relevant to ATACH. These include data and information on chemicals along the health supply chain being available, traceable and transparent, reduced harm to health and health product manufacturing workers, the public and the environment, improving compliance with national and international obligations. And there are indeed a lot of international conventions dealing with different types of chemicals, whether it be mercury, whether it be persistent organic pollutants and so on. Another important objective that's got a lot of support is that chemicals of concern are identified and replaced with safer alternatives, that the stakeholders would have an ongoing commitment to performance improvement and reporting. And also, last but not least, that the policy and regulatory alignment is strengthened to address the barriers and to enable and accelerate innovations and other objectives. And this last one was very much came from the October consultation, and we've been able to take this forward and propose it for inclusion in the global framework of chemicals setting, because it's often overlooked that the regulations are a key barrier to achieving a lot of what we want to do. So as well as the regulations being there to promote safety, they're often barriers to innovations and can be used in a much more creative way to enable us to achieve our objectives. I think this is almost the final slide. The next one, please. So I'm not intending to go through this slide, but we will make the slides available. But I just wanted to indicate the sorts of activities that are being discussed under the Global Framework on Chemicals. Some of them would be of interest to both the ATACH community as well as the Global Framework on Chemicals community. Two that I want to circle on this slide. Firstly, the prioritization so that we prioritize and phase out the most significant environmental and climate impact chemicals. So those with the most significant risks are identified and prioritized. That we also compile a priority chemicals concern list for possible global phase out in the health sector. And that we also use a hierarchy to ensure that plastics are only used for essential uses rather than being the first line choice. So there's a lot of activities there, but also in the area of policy standards and regulations. That's also a very active area of where we're considering work. Next slide, please. So this is just to remind you of where we are in the development in terms of reference for a program focusing on the healthcare industry in this chemicals agreement. We've had the expert consultation in October. That was step one, seeing if we were how many people wanted or had an interest in discussing this issue, and we found many from different areas of work. The second one was we had a more specialized workshop in February of this year, where we got together the key stakeholders to discuss in more detail how this would fit with the global framework on chemicals and what the shape of a possible implementation would be. Then we're having today's meeting, where we also wanting to share where we've got to so far, here's some examples. And then we'll have some formal discussion with governmental representatives at an open-ended working group for the global framework of chemicals in June. And all that then would lead up to October, November 2026, where there could be a consideration of a new program of work on the healthcare industry adopted by the International Conference on Chemicals Management when it meets next year in October or November. So we're about, I'd say, halfway through the process at the moment, really wanting to identify those which have an interest in work. We want to also identify some common interests with the ATACH communities and the task teams and interests, so that we can work out which of those frameworks, ATACH or Global Framework on Chemicals, can be used to pursue the objectives. Of course, not duplicating, but using each of those frameworks to the maximum extent to further our collective cause. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Leslie. I think you've provided an excellent overview of the 2 meetings that we held and the opportunities that we have under the Global Framework of Chemicals, specifically for the health sector. I think, yeah, and you highlighted well the key priority actions, collective actions that were identified in the October consultation. So I'm just here. So we have a poll question for everybody, which is basically, it highlights the 10 priority actions, and if you could select the 5 which are most important for you. So I would ask my colleague Claire if she can launch the question. So considering your role in ATACH or in the Global Framework of Chemical, identify your top 5 priorities in rank order, 1 being highest priority among the key priorities for the collective action. So while you're, answering the poll question, I think we can move on to the next segment, which is a very interesting segment again. As Elena highlighted about the ATACH procurement standards task team, the first presentation is a joint presentation from our task team leads, NHS England, UNDP, and the ICANN. So I would just hand over to Zuleika Henderson, who's a senior advisor from NHS England. She leads the multilateral engagement with other health systems to support the decarbonization of healthcare supply chains, and is the lead for the ATACH task team. She would be joined by colleagues from UNDP, Ian Millimo, who's the project manager and the focal point for ATACH, and Kathleen Engelhard, who is the lead for food environment policies in the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety, and the focal point for WHO hosted initiative on climate action and nutrition under the ATACH. So over to you, Zuleika, Ian, and Kathleen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mega. I'm actually going to call on my colleague, Sarah Wanan, who should also be on this call, who will take the lead on presenting here. Sarah, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself and this slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Zuleika. Thanks, everyone. Very good to see everyone. I'm the head of Net Zero Delivery and Partnerships for the Greener NHS program in NHS England. So as NHS England, we are co-leading with UNDP and ICANN the task team on supply chain, alignment of national procurement standards. And we basically have slightly different objectives and deliverables, which are complementary and hopefully should come very nicely together at the end of this process. So I'll cover what we do for NHS England, but just as an overview, we will focus on what healthcare systems can do at country level. So either creating new standards from scratch or to try and understand how the current standards can be harmonized, because really the idea of this work is to accelerate the decarbonization of our supply chain, and we don't want to create unnecessary burden for our suppliers. So we think that by harmonizing and aligning those standards, we can actually focus on what's really important, but also like avoid suppliers having to adapt to like slightly different requirements in different countries. So how we are going to do that this year is through bringing a lot of contributions together to put together a report to explain what actions healthcare systems can take, and I'll come to that in more detail. And then after that, I'll hand over to colleagues from ICANN and UNDP. So UNDP, while we are focusing more at health system level, UNDP, with the work they've been doing all these previous years, will focus more around, global health initiatives, NGOs, UN agencies. So those very influential stakeholders who have like a different types of levers in terms of procurement. And then ICANN will have a specific focus on food, and we know that in our healthcare supply chain, like food impact is a quite significant impact. So that's why there will be a specific focus on food. If we move to the next slide, I'll focus on what the work we will be leading, and then I'll hand over to colleagues from ICANN and UNDP. So at a high level, this is how we see this report that we're going to produce. Again, as soon as we talk about a report, it sounds really dull, but we are trying to make this resource something that really people can use, so with very practical calls to action, very practical examples that other healthcare systems can use immediately. And the way we've separated it, so general intro and conclusion, it's important though, because I think it's always important to set the scene and to explain like why supply chain in healthcare matter, but also why we do have an influence, because something we often hear is that, oh, but those global supply chains, there's so little we can do. Actually, as buyers, as prescribers, as consumers, there is a lot we can do. And so the way we're going to separate this, what we can do, is in demand-driven actions and supplier-driven actions. And the difference we make here is that we know that some actions need to be taken by our suppliers themselves. And so all we can do is have an indirect influence. So we can put into practice levers that encourage, that, like really incentivize our suppliers to take actions on their supply chain. And this is where we're going to speak a lot about procurement requirement, procurement standards, sort of contract criteria, that sort of things. Demand-driven actions is where we have a direct power to reduce our emissions here and now. And so this is where we're going to speak more about substitution of products, going for like lower carbon product, going for more circular products or more circular approaches to procurement, and a lot of the examples that have been given in the presentation just now. So this is how we're going to structure this report, and in the coming few weeks we're going to call for contributions through a couple of meetings, and we're really hoping to get input from a lot of people. So I'll hand over now to I think Catherine from ICANN.
I think it's Ian. So.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sarah. So colleagues, you could have seen this slide many times, essentially because we've been working together, the 10 agencies that you are seeing on the screen, pushing the agenda of sustainability in the health sector. The 10 agencies that are represented in this initiative are the leading procurers of health commodities in the UN system and outside. On an annual basis, our spend value has been around $5.5 billion on health commodities. And as a result, I think this puts us in a good position to work with both the supply and the demand side of the supply chain in the health sector. We've been committed over the years to bring innovation and sustainability across the board. As I said, I think working both to strengthen the procurement end of the supply chain, but as well as communicating this same message to the manufacturers of health commodities. And what we've done over the years is creating platforms for engagement. We've organized annual meetings in Copenhagen, meeting suppliers to the UN system to make sure that they understand some of these new demands that we are placing on them. At the same time, we've been organizing Global Manufacturers Forum, where we bring governments and manufacturers of health commodities so that they can sit on the same table and understand each other's requirements and demands. We have produced a number of policies. For example, in Vietnam, we were at the forefront in supporting the government with elimination of plastics from the health sector. We provided a lot of guidance, both global and at national level in the countries where we've been. We've also developed a number of strategies, operational procedures to support the procurers and also the manufacturers of health commodities to simply understand. Our key message has been to bring these, as I said, new things to the people that are working in the forefront of supply and application of some of these health commodities. We've been focusing on a number of entry points over the years, including improving packaging for the commodities that we are procuring. We've been looking at energy consumption, making sure that we are procuring health commodities that have got eco labels. We've also been looking at equipments and innovations that consumes less water. We've been looking at strengthening gender as a key component in terms of supply chain, but also looking at other social and human rights related issues, especially where our products are being procured from or manufactured. We're also looking at other issues, including plastics, which I've already highlighted. But also, I think, connecting to the presentation that was made earlier on, we're also using procurement as a barrier for some of those chemicals that have been highlighted to be not good for both the environment and the people that we work in. So as I mentioned, I think working together as members of the SPHS, which is the Sustainable Procurement Initiative in the health sector, we bring together a number of products that have been there. For example, colleagues in PAHO have been leading on the work to do with shipping of some of these commodities. Our partner agency, UNFPA, has been leading in terms of making sure that the manufacturing and supply of condoms and other reproductive health products are green and sustainable. We also, members in Global Fund have come up with a responsible sourcing framework, which has been critical for governments to sort of come up with their own roadmaps. For us in UNDP, working with Healthcare Without Harm, we developed a Sustainable Procurement Index for health, which again, we have highlighted and brought to the attention of our member countries in both the developing South, but also where these commodities are being manufactured. Next slide, please. Next. Yes, so speaking about the Sustainable Procurement Index, as I said, which was a product of UNDP working with Healthcare Without Harm with financial support from CEDA. This is a measurement tool that is available to both the manufacturer and the procurer of health commodities to understand the product that is being procured. The measurement tool that we have on board looks at 4 main dimensions in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, resource consumption, and here we are speaking mostly in terms of energy and water consumption at both manufacturing and health facility level. We are looking at chemicals of concern. As I said, this is an issue that has already been well tabled before me, but also as part and parcel of our DNA as the UN system, We also have been working on the Sustainable Procurement Index, looking at gender, human rights, and labor rights. These have been some of the key issues that we've been working on to make sure that, as I said, we bring sustainability to the fore. This tool, as I said, is available at different levels, not only for equipment, but also for other products that the health sector procures. And I see this, the screen has gone, but I think, as I said, we've been working on this with many other partners, and this is a tool that we have piloted in both large manufacturers of health commodities, but as well as healthcare institutions, both small and large. We have this index in a number of UN languages, including English, and thanks to our colleagues in Healthcare Without Harm for supporting the translation into Spanish, French, and Portuguese. We are hoping to work with other partners to make sure that we produce Index 0.2, and therefore make sure that we support the procuring and supply of health commodities to our countries. So thank you so much. I hand it over to our colleagues from WHO.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll be brief to share with you just a bit on the last of the three sub-task teams. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to share briefly the planned activities. So this sub-task team is being co-led by partners of the Initiative on Climate and Nutrition, also known as ICAN, as was introduced, which is hosted by WHO. But I just want to acknowledge the ICAN partners, which currently include FAO, UNEP, GAINS, and also the government of Egypt, who launched ICAN at COP27. So acknowledging that actually much is happening in the space of public food procurement, a bit of the black sheep out in this discussion today, we will start with the scoping and review of available resources, which includes resources of the ICAN partners, including the WHO framework for the development and implementation of public food procurement and service policies for a healthy diet. This document provides guidance on setting nutrition standards to increase the availability of healthy and safe foods and limits the availability of unhealthy foods and beverages sold. Importantly, subsequent work, and I'm happy to share the references also in the chat, subsequent work by our WHO colleagues in the regional office for Europe also included environmental considerations for food procurement in one of their resources, looking at the sustainability side of the supply chain, for example, looking at means of food distribution used by food suppliers, where and how suppliers source their foods, considering aspects like fair trade or organic production, looking at seasonality and diversity, how food is packaged, how food waste is considered, etc. So the work by the Euro colleagues also looked, for example, at components of the tender process and how the process can be improved to increase procurement of healthier and sustainable foods. The work of FAO is really important because it brings in the link very much between public food procurement and agricultural production, in particular by local and smallholder farmers, and operationalizing procurement, incorporating sustainable considerations, looking at the three pillars of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. So this subtask team will really bring together these resources, exploring other relevant resources, including through calls of information, to develop guidance for sustainable procurement through the health sector, with the target audience actually being the health sector and procurement officers within the health sector. And resources permitting following the guidance development. So we will plan for regional and in-country capacity building, also in collaboration with ICAN partners. And just to announce that we'll be holding a kickoff meeting of the subtask team next week, Wednesday at 2 p.m. So if anyone on the call should be interested to join a food-related subtask team on procurement, please just send a message in the chat. But I'll pass back to my ATACH colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks for opening up to the participants. I'm sure there would be many questions on how they can really contribute to the existing task teams and upcoming technical meetings. So we would actually not take up any questions for now, and I think I'll straight move to Julian, who is sitting here right next to me. He is the lead for Climate and Health Strategic Initiative in Unitaid, and would be presenting Unitaid's work, Unitaid's climate and health strategy, the strategy that focuses on ensuring that the health products it supports not only deliver strong health outcomes, but also are climate smart and low carbon footprint. So I think I'll hand it over to you, Julian. You would explain it better than I would, and maybe a little line of Unitaid, if people want to know what Unitaid works on. So over to you, Julian. Thanks.
Sure. And with our work and at Unitaid, I'll summarize.
Start again. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Start again.
Can you hear me?
Can everybody hear? Yeah, I think they can now hear you.
Now, yes.
Oh, okay. No. Okay. I'll restart. So again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So I'll start my presentation with a quick presentation about climate and health strategy at Unitaid, and also to give a little bit of background as to those of you who are the least familiar about the type of work we do. So at Unitaid, I'll summarize by saying actually we work to introduce and shape markets for health products in LMICs, and our core mission is to ensure that these products, these innovations are effective, safe, and affordable, and eventually they're equitably accessible. And I'll just add to that actually as part of our climate strategy, we now added a new dimension. We want to also work to also make those products, health products, are climate smart. And what we mean by that actually it's products that are less harmful to the environment, more resilient, more responsive, and more locally adapted to climate climate context. And through that type of work, we of course aim to contribute to the low carbon and climate resilience agenda of global supply chain. So I will not go through our framework in detail. I'm happy to take any question on that. But just to say, actually, going forward, we're now putting our strategy into action, and we are taking aboard many of the priorities we discussed during the October expert consultation. So, and we've identified already a number of investments that we want to put into motion in the forthcoming 2 years, and I'll walk you through 2 examples to illustrate the step we're taking. Now we intend to go about engaging ATACH on that matter. So the next slide, please. Good. So the first example I wanted to take is actually we are focusing on the challenge of its stability, which happens to be a challenge that many organizations have been surfacing, many countries have been surfacing recently. As we all know, many health products like medicines, diagnostic, and other key products, including those that are being supported by Unitaid, are very sensitive to heat and humidity. We know that actually if they degrade, they lose effectiveness, or worse, they could even become unsafe. You take the example of medicines. And another example that we often take is also large testing platforms that require very stable temperature to produce reliable testing results, without which a clinical diagnosis cannot be effective. So even rapid tests, another example, and on the slide you see a few elements coming out from many studies that have been done over the past years. Those malaria rapid tests can degrade in the heat. Something again, studies have been looking at across multiple settings. And as we know, climate change accelerates, these risks will intensify, and yet there are very few of those studies that have started to take a forward-looking approach to assess how climate scenarios will be impacting the stability, the future heat stability of those products. So at Unitaid, what we aim to do is to launch a new investment, most likely towards the end of Q3, early Q4, to first focus on generating evidence on these vulnerabilities for certain categories of products, so specific product or specific families of product, and also work on the solution side to try to map the solutions that are applicable, the most applicable, the most relevant to those heat challenges, and to some extent try to also advance the financing of those heat management solutions. And as part of that type of work, we aim to leverage the ATACH platform to organize technical consultations. So bear with us, but we'll come back to the ATACH, likely to organize a technical meeting, as part of which we'd like to share findings we've been able to generate through the consultation process. So the other example is, next slide, please. It's not, so the first example was an example on climate adaptation type of work we're doing through the product work. The second example builds on, I would say, the mitigation part of the work we're trying to lead, and it largely builds this agenda. So advancing the deterioration of the HIV treatment largely built on a study we did more than a year ago already, as part of which we found out that the first-line HIV treatment, while it's critical, of course, for saving lives, also has surprisingly high carbon footprint at market scale, mainly stemming from the production of active pharmaceutical ingredient. And at scale, this represents for 32 million patients estimated by 2030 in MICs. This could reach or match the entire emissions of an entire city like the city of Geneva. So what we've done since then, we've in 2024, at the end of 2024, early 2025, we took this work further. We engaged with 20 manufacturers. So first of all, we tried to refine our carbon footprint analysis to make sure eventually the numbers we're working with were reliable. Importantly, we've discussed with suppliers, we've mapped suppliers across countries to identify what the most critical hotspots are. We've investigated with the supplier themselves to see how feasible the decarbonization is, both technically and financially. We've also assessed how ready suppliers are to support the decarbonization agenda. And eventually also we studied additional barriers, especially market barriers that could be impeding the actioning, so to say, of this decarbonization strategy. So today, as we speak, we're in the process of, let's say, finalizing the scoping of that investment that we aim to put in motion through the period 2025-2026. And we believe this could be done with a, let's say, multifaceted market shaping intervention. I think Sarah from the NHS was mentioning supply side and demand side type of work that could be done with suppliers. So this is really something we fully embrace. And as, on top of that, I would say we'll be working also towards figuring out how we can bring technical assistance to manufacturers in order for them to fully understand what LACA is, how decarbonization strategy can be pursued for a given product and eventually reach an impact at market level. So this is the end of my presentation. I'll stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much, Julian, and for all the collaboration that we've had and, the continuing collaboration that have been working with you through ATACH and all the initiatives that Rogerio highlighted that Unitaid is supporting in terms of pre-qualification and regulation work. So congratulations on, doing the top-down approach in terms of having a strategy and implementing it through across your work. So I think I will invite our next speaker who's here, Padma. Dr. Padma Kamachi is the Director of Regulations and Scientific Affairs at the Global Self-Care Federation, which is an international organization representing manufacturers and associations in the self-care industry, dedicating to promoting responsible self-medication and consumer health products. So over to you, Padma, and thanks for being here with us.
Thank you, Megha, and thank you to all the organizers and hosts. It's a pleasure to be here to share knowledge and experiences. So I work for the consumer healthcare industry, and like Megha said, we represent manufacturers and trade associations, regional trade associations active in this space towards non-prescription medicines and food supplements. If we go on to the next slide, please. So we onboarded on our environmental journey back in 2020, and the idea was that responsible self-care should not mean that we are not taking into account planetary consideration. So we wanted to ensure both planetary health and human health through our initiatives. So that's when we started a voluntary action, an industry-wide voluntary action in this space to promote best practices, advice on regulatory standards, so that early on we are weaving in environmental aspects and without compromising on health outcomes or product safety or even access to consumers and patients. So we were looking at areas in which we could uniquely deliver. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So that's when the Charter for Environmentally Sustainable Self-Care was launched. And the idea in here was, as a federation, we wanted to develop guidelines because we are a global federation with a very broad church, right from, health industries and local trade associations really operating in LMICs. So we wanted really to have, deliver on our ambitions, but by sharing best practices, help raise the bar overall for the healthcare industry in terms of environmental sustainability, and have like an enriching dialogue with stakeholders to proactively inform them on the progress of our environmental sustainability journey, incorporate their feedback as we go along. In terms of our guiding principles, couple of aspects here to, like I said before, to have more of positive environmental impacts and reduce the negative impacts on the environment without compromising on health outcomes, and then also incorporate as much as possible circular economy principles in terms of the value chains, manage the impact of our products right from discovery to the development, all the way to end of life as well. And last but not the least, innovation, which is quite a critical element to have them and other solutions included in addressing environmental challenges. So uniquely distilling it down, 3 areas where our sector could have its own impact, where plastics in packaging, pharmaceuticals in the environment, and CO2 footprint. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Specifically, in terms of plastics and packaging, of course, reduction of plastic packaging wherever feasible, including circular design principles, and then exploring partnership towards other stakeholders to improve the recycling infrastructure, which we'll kind of deep dive into. And then in terms of pharmaceuticals in the environment, to reduce effluent discharge from manufacturing plants, also safe disposal in terms of take-back schemes to promote them wherever they exist, and in general, related to pharmaceuticals in the environment, have a platform to have a dialogue in terms of what are the new developments, what needs to happen. In terms of CO2 footprints, I think reduce the carbon emissions in line with the science-based targets to keep global warming 1.5 degree below the pre-industrial levels, just in line with the Paris Agreement. Scope 1 and 2 are relatively simpler, so to say, but also to have like a dialogue collectively on how to move the needle on Scope 3 emissions. So we'll start with the CO2 footprint first. The next slide, please. So our role was really to help very small and medium enterprises who don't really have the bandwidth to work on, supply chain and so on. So the idea was to establish principles, provide them with key resources. So we kind of helped out with a carbon footprint questionnaire, which, by the way, when we started, we also worked on to different areas as well. So there are, aspects of packaging, there are aspects of, water usage and so on. So all of them condensed. So this kind of onboarded really small enterprises into this. The second was how to bring down greenhouse gas emissions. So we do have very small suppliers. We do also have very small, companies who are working in the medicines manufacturing area. So just to onboard them. For this, like we said, nothing on the environment can happen without stakeholder in collaboration. So we did have, the suppliers, we did have pharmaceutical supply chain initiative, Manufacture 2030, who are really moving very fast, quickly along this line. So with them, we just started the basic, and now the idea is that they take the conversation forward. The next slide, please. Now comes the biggie. We've heard plastics quite a bit. We've heard packaging quite a bit. So essentially what we are doing, I invite you all to read this position paper. We can drop a link in the chat as well to these. By the way, all of our documents, we are very proud partners of ATACH. So all of our documents are in the ATACH community of practice. They've been referenced there for everyone to use. So moving ahead, one of the unique things, there are a couple of other formats as well, like the tubes, the bottles, wherein we can have greater learnings from other sectors, sachets as well, but then uniquely blister packs, which is like the healthcare packaging, primary packaging. On this, our work bucket really focused on, what could be a roadmap for blisters? How do we transition to newer generation recycle ready blisters? And then, of course, do the waste streams actually have the ability to use to kind of recycle these blisters, and what do we say about the global recycling streams? So our very initial idea, like I said, is being put into this position paper, wherein we highlight like the vision for more sustainable product packaging solutions. So like I said, a couple of themes here: reduce unnecessary plastics packaging wherever possible, or move towards recycle ready. The second is, what kind of innovative partnership would we need to move the needle between brand owners, retailers, government, other stakeholders to ensure that, there are proper collection, sorting, recycling solutions available at scale, and also well-designed EPR schemes. And then, of course, just having all of these ecosystem ready is not the end goal. We also need to educate patients, consumers on how to sort these different packaging materials and what needs to be true to ensure that these actually end up in the recycling streams. And then last but not the least, there are a couple of, we are healthcare, access is our primary task, and we can't jeopardize access. We can't have the situation wherein, jeopardized products reach our patients and consumers. So of course, we incorporate as much as possible the circular design principles into packaging. But then there could be some cases in very niche scenarios wherein circular design is determined to be unfeasible or environmentally disadvantageous, and then we encourage reuse in alternative forms. So this is a situation which has to be very well considered. So I think there are also some key aspects, key elements for transitions and recommendations for policymaker. We have quite a lot of institutional stakeholders today here, so I would really encourage to have a thought on it. The first is that circularity should be driven by innovation. So there are many functional supply chain future legislations, etc., that are being worked on, like we've seen today through the various presentations, guidance, standards, supply chain initiatives. All of them should factor in innovation. We live in a very digital era, environmentally sound initiative season. So I think innovation is something that will kind of be expedited in the coming years. We'll see more on that. The second and most critical aspect here is the improved collection infrastructure. I think recycled materials, yes, they are great, but then one piece that we really need to think about is that they should meet quality, safety, performance standards, efficacy, equivalent, if not better, to virgin materials. And they should have tangible environmental benefits. We're already seeing increased prices and so on. So these are some bare minimums that we need to think about. Also, there are a couple of other nuances to be taken into account on the EPR schemes. Does it make sense? What is the overall benefit of an EPR program? How do we design them? Last but not the least, there is also the underpinning aspects that we are all speaking the same language. So there needs to be work done around harmonized terminologies, definitions, labeling rules that need to be put forward. And I think we are working with one of our great partners in here that I've mentioned, Recyclas. I just want to rehash about their relevance. So they are developing standards for greater plastic packaging, but recently they've also established a working group specifically focusing on pharmaceuticals. So I invite everyone to kind of look them up, look about their standards. They are predominantly in the EU, but some of their standards are also applicable in the US. And I think one of the parts that's underpinning, we are yet to think about holistically as a healthcare sector, is on compliance of the regulatory frameworks, especially on the labeling requirements, because this is of paramount importance. So regulators further need to see how do we kind of bring these two worlds together. On one end, there is the packaging that needs to be recycled, and then there is the other end wherein we have the minimum essential information that appear on the packaging that may or may not be, good enough for sorting, recycling, and so on. So how do we kind of, innovate in such a way that we deliver the right information to patients, but at the same time, we also ensure appropriate sorting and recycling. The next slide, please. This is my last slide. I just wanted to share a link with our progress report for this year. So it's not one time and done that we started in 2021. Every year we've put forward a report on our progress across the 3 value streams that I've mentioned, what we have been doing, our members have been doing, and collectively where we see these efforts joining forces. So I invite you to take a look at them. You're welcome to share any questions, thoughts, comments. I've put in my email address as well here. Thank you.
Thanks, Padma, so much. It's good to see that, how the supply side, and especially the companies that you work with are still ensuring the quality of care and including innovation and the principles that we talked about, the collective principles into the work that we're doing. So yeah, definitely we look forward to all the exciting work you've been doing. And I would encourage you to just put the link in the chat so people can then look at, the work. So now I think this is the last presentation. I know we are a little back behind our schedule, but I mean, these were all interesting presentations. So now we have Will Clark, who is the Director for Supply Chain and Transformation in Healthcare Without Harm. Before that, he was the Executive Director for Healthcare Without Harm. And even prior to that, was working with NHS England as the Director of Sustainability and Transformation across a group of leading NHS hospitals. Will, the floor is all yours. And thanks for connecting the dots of, decarbonizing and detoxification of healthcare supply chains.
Thanks, Mega. Thank you. I'll do my best to do that. And yeah, thank you very much for inviting me along and allowing me to talk to you guys about what Healthcare Without Harm is doing in this space. If you just go to the next slide, please. Excellent, thank you. So some of you people on the call may be aware that Healthcare Without Harm launched a new international strategy at the end of last year, and that essentially sets two main areas of focus for our work in the global health sector between now and 2028. So one of those is addressing the climate crisis, so working across both mitigation and adaptation in healthcare, and then the other is tackling the global plastics crisis. And I think one of the most important things our strategy attempts to do is to bring the relationship between both the climate and plastics crises into sharper focus, and to highlight the links between them. Both of these crises have their roots in the petrochemicals industry. But in addition to that, plastics is currently about 3 to 5% of global emissions. It's forecast to rise to 15% by 2050. And in addition to that, plastics, particularly plastics polymers like PVC, contain toxic chemicals like DEHP and other chemicals of concern. So there's a strong overlap between these two agendas. We all know that single-use plastics are ubiquitous in healthcare now. Our work shows that an average of 30% of hospital waste is plastic. It's up to 80% in some regions and departments. So for us, taking action to eliminate non-essential plastics and phasing out the most toxic plastics like PVC, that creates a pathway to both detoxification and decarbonisation in healthcare. So that's the kind of platform we're building. And the starting point for looking at what success could look like is to take UNEP's target to cut plastic pollution globally by 80% by 2040, set out in their Turning Off the Tap roadmap. So we're looking at how that could be applied to the health sector in a kind of bottom up way. If you just go to the next slide, please. Fantastic, thank you. So transforming the supply chain is one of the key cross-cutting kind of change levers that we've described in our strategy. And there's various channels that we're working through from both a top-down and a bottom-up perspective to drive that transformation. And I've just summarized them here. So from a top-down perspective, I mean, the first thing is that framing is really key here. So we're working to establish a really clear and unambiguous global narrative in healthcare that fossil fuel phase out is critical if we want to successfully decarbonize and detoxify healthcare. And actually the voices of healthcare professionals around the world has been really powerful in helping us to project that narrative globally. The second point is that international policy frameworks are a really important driver. I mean, we've heard about the global framework on chemicals, and we're supporting the health sector implementation plan around that. We think that's going to be really important. But of course, the other one is the Global Plastics Treaty and the ongoing negotiations around that. We've been very active in advocating for no blanket exemptions in healthcare, among other things. And of course, one of the really important things the Strong Plastics Treaty will do is create a level playing field for suppliers. So that will be through harmonized rules and standards, regulatory frameworks for plastics production, transparency, terminology we just heard about. So we're really pushing for that and for health to be embedded throughout. And then the third thing is that we see partnerships with global institutions as a really important, because that's about aligning messaging and goals and creating strong market signals. So as an example, we're working with the Asian Development Bank and Unitaid on a supply chains transformation paper at the moment, which sets out 6 key strategies for change. And then just to finish, actually most of our work really is working from the bottom up, and that's focused through our Global Green and Healthy Hospitals network. So that has over 2,100 members now across 87 countries. And we have a number of pilot initiatives to demonstrate and showcase practical opportunities to substitute plastics. So, for example, we have a project in 4 countries on 3 continents to identify opportunities to introduce more sustainable textile products into clinical care. Alongside that, we've got lots of tools, sort of more generic tools and resources to inform procurement actions particularly. So we have various audit tools. We have the Sustainable Procurement Index for Health that Ian mentioned earlier, so I don't need to talk about that, but it's, as Ian said, a measurement standard we developed with UNDP to inform procurement and supplier engagement in healthcare institutions. And then lastly, and this maybe is the most exciting point, I mean, we're developing lots of really impactful campaigns to engage audiences particularly and to scale change. So an example of that is a project that began life in Europe called the Born Green Generation Project. And that focuses on the environmental impact and health risks posed by early life care models. So it seeks to identify existing product alternatives that can be adopted within that care pathway and adopted at scale, as well as some supply chain innovation gaps that can inform future work. So I think going forward for us, taking a care pathway approach to creating more circular and sustainable value chains is a really interesting area. It's one we want to talk to partners and other organizations about. We're always very happy to do that and collaborate. So I'll end there. Hopefully that's been a helpful overview, and yeah, happy to answer any questions.
So thanks a lot, Will. I think this was excellent, to connect the two detoxification and decarbonization work and the plastics work, that highlighting how much plastics is used in the health sector, different ways of reducing the impact of plastics. So I see my colleague has shared the poll results, and I would just encourage everybody to raise your hands for question and answer. So I just have one question, while I see hands coming up. I have a question for you, Will. You just mentioned about the green hospital network that's there, which is across all the continents. So can you just provide some examples where hospitals are leading the way in substituting plastic products to detoxify and decarbonize the supply chain? Maybe some examples which would be helpful for others. So.
Yeah, I could do that. I mean, the good news is it's happening everywhere. We've heard a lot about circular economy on this call, and that's a model that we're really interested in. There's a hierarchy of interventions with recycling at one end and kind of avoidance at the other. And avoidance for plastics for us is like the holy grail. So, the lowest impact and lowest cost product is the one you don't use. And we've got lots of examples of hospitals that are phasing out unnecessary plastics and toxic plastics in particular. I mean, that starts with really simple things like food service items, secondary packaging, and you can find these case studies on our website. In some parts of our network, the regulatory environment is pushing that, but in others, it's going further. So looking at PPE, gowns and gloves, that kind of thing. Not so far from where I am now is Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. They're one of our members. They run a fantastic campaign called The Gloves Are Off a few years ago. That targeted excessive and improper use of gloves. And they saw a significant reduction in gloves while keeping infection rates within normal parameters. But, if you look to the US, actually, there's lots of examples of kind of scaling more advanced opportunities. So looking at taking advantage of group purchasing opportunities. And that's, involved things like switching items like gowns and basins and even medical devices like trocars, switching from single use to reusable stainless steel. And sometimes that involves engaging suppliers to redesign the product. And then Colombia, we had a fantastic example of replacing PVC masks with silicone. So, I mean, there's lots of examples of avoidance and substitution happening across our network in all parts of the.
Thanks, Will. I think this is super helpful. And maybe if there's a link which we can share with the participants where they can get access to these case studies would be helpful. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat, but is there or hand raised? But in the meanwhile, I've received something. One question for you, Julian, that I have is, you shared this excellent work that you're doing. So what has driven the selection of Unitaid's investment priorities on health and climate? I know where other organizations are struggling, or some of them have just stepped back, but we still continue to work on this. And what is the motivation there?
Oh, I think there's been a multiple trigger, I would say, but I think that the first important trigger is a study we've been doing with an expert sounding board, similar type of consultation we did in October last year. We've tried to embark as many stakeholders as possible. Our goal was really to generate evidence that could inform our investment going forward as part of our traditional model, to scope, to generate evidence, to depart from the evidence, to consult with partners. And I think the expert sounding board we created at the time of the so-called milligram to megaton study really has created a basis for us to feel comfortable about a given space where actually evidence was relatively scarce. It has helped us start to engage with stakeholders. And I think over the past 12 months, I would say, we've been engaged with so many stakeholders that sort of a confirmed the initial findings we have had that could inform credibly our next step, our investment. If I just take the example of feed stability, we've done some scoping work. We look forward to engaging with ATACH now going forward. Again, we'd like to have this very collaborative approach to consultation to generate the critical insight so that we can start articulating an investment in the most meaningful way with respect to interest, stakes, and also already study or work already happening with different partners. So really working in full collaboration with the ecosystem, I would say.
Great, excellent. I see there's one question. Leslie, can
well, there's just looking through the comments and in the chat, and I think we have a colleague from PATH in India who's working with public health supply chain management in 9 states in India. I'm just wondering, AJ, Patty, would you like to take the floor and make an intervention?
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you so much for giving the opportunity to include us. And I want to share that we are working with GOI, Government of India, in strengthening supply chain management, wherein one of the problem which we are nowadays seeing is the carbon emission from each and every process at the supply chain management is too high. And I want to understand from you people how, like during the presentation, we also seen there are lots of steps which we can take during this at each step. So I want to ask the panelists what kind of strategy we should adopt so that at each and every step we can reduce the carbon emission and all. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody from the panel would take? So you essentially, I'm sorry, you're a little difficult to hear you, but you want to know what should be the strategy to reduce the carbon emissions across the supply chain?
Yeah. So I know at different stages. So what can be the strategy we should adopt?
Great. I leave it to the panelists. Anybody would want to answer that? Go ahead, Julian.
Yeah, happy to come in. I mean, the approach we've been taking at Unitaid is very product driven, very product centric, I would say. So eventually we've been using what we call product life cycle analysis. We've been using this type of assessment in order to evaluate where the carbon emissions were stemming from, identifying the drivers, identifying the sources, identifying the suppliers, identifying the geographies with a view to pinpoint the exact hotspots as to where the emission were situated, with a view to start looking into ways and in which basically decarbonization could be achieved both technically but also financially. At Unitaid we work a lot on access, and eventually decarbonizing product at zero cost to patient is very important. So we're really using the LCA work as a way to sort of generate the critical evidence towards which basically we can work on. I would say importantly, we work again with partners and stakeholders. We work very closely with manufacturers. Oftentimes, I mean, many of the products we've looked at, some 80% of the carbon emissions really upstream. So really focusing on, I would say, material manufacturing, material acquisition, and eventually finished product manufacturing. So again, by identifying those hotspots, we're able to target our next step. And it's still work in progress for us, but that's the initial step we've been taking in our journey here.
Thanks, Julian. I see Sarah has her hand raised, and I'm just conscious of time as well. So Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, it's just it's an interesting question, and I think what Julian described is like, starting from the product to then like understanding the hotspots. I think in a very complementary way we can also do sort of the other way, because some companies, some suppliers will have started by looking at their emissions overall, like following the greenhouse gas protocol approach, for example. And so we know, for example, of suppliers who've grouped together to look at their energy supply. Energy is like a massive proportion of the carbon footprint of our medicines, for example. So the two approaches definitely go hand in hand, and it is useful to look at product by product because it allows to have also like targeted interventions. But I would say bringing your suppliers together, helping that collaboration that Julian was speaking about, identifying where we can group forces on things like, power purchasing agreement, that sort of things, can also help make like step changes quite quickly. So I would encourage both approaches at the same time.
Thanks, Sarah. And just conscious of time, I'll just hand it over to Leslie now for closing. Yeah. And I'm sure I wish we had more time, but.
Well, thanks very much, Mega, and thanks to all of the participants and speakers. I think it's obvious to those of us that have been involved this afternoon that there's a lot going on in this area, and a lot of vibrancy in the commitments and the types of work and the initiatives and the innovation that we're hearing about. We will make the slides available to the participants following today's meeting, and also we have a recording also that we can make available. The important part about this meeting and the reason why we held it was to just take stock of what's been happening since the October and February consultations, so that we can report back firstly to the steering committee of ATACH task teams to inform them about what's been happening, and so they can make decisions about how the ATACH community wants to work in this area. But secondly, as I said, coming up in the next few weeks in June, there'll also be a big meeting in Uruguay where those governments and stakeholders working on chemicals will also be taking stock of what's happened and what the appetite is for working in this area of healthcare. So those are two very important opportunities to get further support and direction. But there is a lot going on, and I think that as they indicated in those last two questions, that there's certainly a need for some further prioritization and working out how best we can work together to avoid some cumbersome structures, but still gain the collaboration and the political involvement and support that's needed. So there's a good alignment and commitment to working on climate and health, and also climate, health and chemicals, decarbonisation, detoxification, and certain topics which fit very nicely at the intersection of some of those things like plastics, working to reduce plastics production and use. So we look very much forward to continuing this dialogue and this conversation. We will be trying to disseminate the information as much as possible through the ATACH community website, through the Global Framework on Chemicals, and we will keep you informed of further sessions like today that will be held. So once again, thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you for you to participate this afternoon, and thank you very much for your interest. And please, if you have any questions, please you can send them in to Mega or to myself. And the next steps on the slide, just a reminder, that's the ATACH face-to-face meeting in July, and then just before then, at the end of June, the open-ended working group of the Global Framework on Chemicals in Uruguay. Mega, final word from yourself?
No, thank you so much. I mean, I'll leave it to Elena. Elena, do you want to add something from the Secretariat side?
No, nothing to add. It has been a very useful meeting, so congratulations to all of you who have been involved. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and
Thank you
thanks
very
to all the speakers. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to all the participants. Thank you.